Throughout July, great bands formed, careers changed, controversies erupted, and final concerts passed without anyone realizing what they had just witnessed. These are the 12 music history stories that reached the most viewers on this channel, and the remarkable moments behind them. The band that should have been finished had lost the great Bon Scott, but only months later, they released one of the biggest rock albums ever made. On July 25, 1980, AC/DC released Back in Black just 5 months after the sudden death of singer Bon Scott. The band could have ended there. Instead, Angus and Malcolm Young brought in Brian Johnson, then headed to the Bahamas to make the most important album of their lives. The sessions were anything but easy. Tropical storms disrupted the power, equipment was delayed in customs, and producer Mutt Lange pushed Johnson through take after take. For Hell's Bells, engineers tried recording a real tower bell, but pigeons and traffic ruined it, so a massive bronze bell was recorded instead. The all-black cover was designed as a tribute for Bon Scott, but the record company insisted that the AC/DC logo be outlined. Back in Black became one of the best-selling albums ever. They didn't erase Bon Scott. They turned their grief into a tribute and one of rock's greatest comebacks. While the previous band rebuilt after losing their singer, nearly 3 decades later, another rock legend faced a very different problem. The police didn't believe Bob Dylan was Bob Dylan. On July 23, 2009, a New Jersey police officer stopped a rain-soaked man wandering through a neighborhood and asked his name. His answer, Bob Dylan. The problem? She didn't believe him. Dylan was wearing black sweatpants, rain boots, and 2 hooded raincoats, and he had no identification. When he said he was touring with Willie Nelson and John Mellencamp, the officer became even more suspicious. She placed him in the back of the patrol car and drove him to the hotel where his tour buses were parked. Dylan stayed calm and said he understood. At the hotel, his manager produced his passport, proving that the soaked stranger really was one of music's most famous songwriters. Dylan wasn't arrested or charged. He was simply returned to his tour, and the young officer got teased for weeks after failing to recognize a legend. The great Bob Dylan wasn't the first rock legend caught in a bizarre misunderstanding with authorities. Decades earlier, 3 members of the Rolling Stones ended up in court, and it all started because they simply needed to take a leak. They just needed a bathroom, and somehow, they ended up in court. On July 22, 1965, Mick Jagger, Brian Jones, and Bill Wyman appeared at West Ham Magistrates Court over a bizarre incident 4 months earlier. After a show in Rumford, the Rolling Stones stopped at a gas station in Forest Gate. Bill Wyman asked to use the restroom, but the attendant refused, saying the toilets were being repaired. According to the court case, Mick Jagger, Brian Jones, and Bill Wyman then relieved themselves against a nearby wall, and the argument turned into a newspaper scandal. All 3 were found guilty of insulting behavior and fined £5 each, plus court costs. The magistrate warned that being famous did not give them the right to act that way. But the scandal only strengthened the Rolling Stones' image as rock and roll's original bad boys. Enjoying the stories? Subscribe for more music history. Not every major turning point began with confusion or chaos. Some began with a new sound, a new band, or the first recording of a song that would become legendary. Chapter 2 begins with a young singer who was still searching for his sound, until one recording changed everything. Elvis paid $4 for this record. 62 years later, it sold for $300,000. On this day, July 18, 1953, 18-year-old Elvis Presley walked into the Memphis recording service, later known as Sun Studio. He recorded 2 songs onto a single acetate, My Happiness, and That's When Your Heartaches Begin. Elvis reportedly made it for his mother, Gladys, but the Presley family didn't even own a record player. So he took it to his friend Ed Leake's house, listened to it, and left it there. The forgotten disc survived for decades. In 2015, it went to auction, and the secret buyer was later revealed as Jack White from the band, the White Stripes. Before the fame and screaming crowds, Elvis's recording career began with $4 and one fragile record. Elvis's $4 recording marked a quiet beginning. 13 years later, three established British musicians came together to form one of rock's earliest supergroups.
Eric Clapton agreed to form a new band, but only if Ginger Baker hired the one musician he couldn't stand. On July 16, 1966, the pieces of Cream were falling into place. Baker wanted Clapton on guitar. Clapton said yes, but asked for Jack Bruce on bass. That was a problem. Baker and Bruce had already fought bitterly in the Graham Bond organization. But Clapton knew how powerful Bruce was as a bassist and singer, so Baker agreed. The three began rehearsing in London, combining blues, jazz, and explosive improvisation. Clapton on guitar, Bruce on bass and vocals, Baker on drums. Three elite musicians, enormous talent, and tension that never disappeared. Cream lasted only about 2 years, but helped define the power trio and became one of rock's first true supergroups.
Cream created a powerful new kind of rock band. 3 years later, the Beatles entered Abbey Road Studios and began recording one of the most recognizable songs of their final era. Paul McCartney heard John Lennon's new song and thought there was a problem. It sounded too much like Chuck Berry. On July 21, 1969, the Beatles began recording Come Together at EMI Studios for Abbey Road, which was the final album they recorded together. But the early version had a different feel, and Paul thought it came a little too close to Berry's You Can't Catch Me. So Paul suggested slowing it down and giving it a swampy groove. That change helped create the dark, hypnotic sound that made Come Together unforgettable. But the similarity was still close enough to cause a later legal dispute. A song that almost sounded too familiar became one of the Beatles' most famous recordings. This is what happened on this day in music and entertainment history. Enjoying the stories? Subscribe for more music history. Some moments changed rock through a recording. Others happened when an artist stepped onto a stage, took a major career risk, or performed before a crowd too enormous to comprehend.
On July 13, 1985, Queen took the stage at Live Aid in London's Wembley Stadium and delivered what many still call one of the greatest live performances in rock history. In just about 20 minutes, Freddie Mercury, Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon turned a benefit concert set into a legendary moment. With songs like Radio Gaga, Hammer to Fall, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, and We Are the Champions, Queen had the crowd completely in their hands. Freddie Mercury's energy, voice, and stage presence made the performance unforgettable. More than a concert, Queen's Live Aid set became one of the defining moments in music history.
Queen commanded one of the world's biggest stages as a band. A few years earlier, Stevie Nicks had taken a very different risk, stepping outside Fleetwood Mac to prove she could succeed on her own. Fleetwood Mac was already one of the biggest bands in the world, but Stevie Nicks still had more songs than the band could use. So on July 27, 1981, she took a big risk and released her first solo album, Belladonna. She wasn't quitting Fleetwood Mac, she was proving she could stand on her own, and the gamble paid off fast. Belladonna hit #1 and turned Stevie into a solo star without taking her out of the band. With Edge of 17, Leather and Lace, and Stop Dragging My Heart Around with Tom Petty, Stevie Nicks proved Fleetwood Mac wasn't the limit. She became a solo superstar while still belonging to one of rock's biggest bands. Stevie Nicks proved she could command the spotlight alone. But in 1973, three legendary bands shared the stage before one of the largest crowds in rock history. Woodstock is the festival everybody remembers. But on July 28, 1973, a concert in upstate New York drew an even bigger crowd. It was called the Watkins Glen Summer Jam, and it brought together three massive acts: the Grateful Dead, the Allman Brothers Band, and the band. An estimated 600,000 people packed the racetrack, turning the show into one of the biggest outdoor concerts in music history. Fans arrived early, camped everywhere, and created a sea of people so huge it looked almost unreal. Then the music started. The day featured long sets, a wild festival atmosphere, and eventually a huge closing jam with members of all three groups sharing the stage. Woodstock gets the legend. But Watkins Glen was bigger, and somehow a lot of people still don't know what happened. Watkins Glen showed just how enormous a rock concert could become. But some of July's most powerful stories came from concerts that marked the end of an era, whether anyone realized it at the time or not.
Nobody in this crowd knew they were watching Jerry Garcia's final concert. On July 9, 1995, the Grateful Dead took the stage at Soldier Field in Chicago for what would become the final performance of Jerry Garcia's legendary career. To the fans in attendance, it was simply the last show of the summer tour. But just 1 month later, on August 9th, Garcia passed away at the age of 53. His death marked the end of an era. After nearly 30 years together, the Grateful Dead would never perform again with the man whose guitar and songwriting helped define one of the most devoted fan communities in music history. Even today, Jerry Garcia's legacy lives on through the music, the memories, and generations of fans who still celebrate the spirit of the Grateful Dead. Join me tomorrow for another unforgettable moment in music and entertainment history.
Jerry Garcia's final concert wasn't meant to be a farewell. But nearly 30 years later, Ozzy Osbourne walked on stage knowing the crowd was there to say goodbye. 17 days before Ozzy Osbourne died, he gave the world one final goodbye. On July 5, 2025, Ozzy returned to Birmingham for Back to the Beginning, his farewell concert, and the final live performance by Black Sabbath. Unable to stand for the full set, he sang from a black throne before 40,000 fans, and reunited with Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, the original Black Sabbath lineup. They closed with Paranoid, ending the story in the same city where Black Sabbath began. Ozzy thanked the crowd for giving him the life he had dreamed of. Then, on July 22nd, his family announced that the Prince of Darkness had died at 76. The fans knew they were watching a farewell concert. No one knew it would become Ozzy Osbourne's final goodbye just 17 days later. Ozzy knew he was taking his final bow, but when Led Zeppelin walked off stage in Oakland in 1977, no one knew they had just played their final concert in America. On July 24, 1977, tens of thousands gathered to watch Zeppelin take the stage. But nobody in that stadium knew they were watching the band's final concert ever in America. The weekend was already surrounded by chaos. Members of Led Zeppelin's entourage had been accused of brutally attacking one of their promoters, Bill Graham's employees. Despite the tension backstage, Zeppelin returned for the second sold-out show. They rocked out to their hits like Kashmir, Achilles' Last Stand, and Stairway to Heaven before closing the concert with Whole Lotta Love and Rock and Roll. Then, only 2 days later, Robert Plant received devastating news. His 5-year-old son, Karak, had died suddenly. The remaining American tour dates were canceled. Led Zeppelin eventually returned to the stage elsewhere, but they never performed another concert in the United States. Those fans in Oakland never knew they had just witnessed the end of an era. Those were some of the biggest music history stories we covered in July. Which one deserves a full-length episode? Tell me in the comments and subscribe for more music history.